She found 17 batches of jollof rice in his kitchen notes, 17, each one dated, each one annotated, each one failed until the last, and when she asked him why a man who controlled half of Korea's underground economy had spent 6 months trying to perfect a Nigerian dish he had never tasted, he said, "Because you mentioned Sunday mornings at home, and I couldn't give you Lagos, but I thought maybe I could give you the smell of it." She didn't know what to say, neither did he. Because this man, feared by politicians, hunted by rivals, avoided by everyone who understood what his name actually meant, had spent 14 months quietly reorganizing his entire life around one woman, a woman who worked in his house, a woman who never once asked him for anything, a woman who for the entire time he was protecting her had no idea she needed protecting. And the night she finally found out the truth, she left. Because how do you stay in a room with a man like that? How do you love someone who kept you safe from a war you never knew you were in? This is the story of a cold mafia boss who never wanted anything for 35 years, until he came home on the wrong night and found laughter inside his house. But to understand what those 17 batches of jollof rice meant, you need to go back to the beginning, to a Tuesday night in November, to a man who never came home early, and to a Nigerian woman who accidentally fell asleep in his bed. The story begins here. He came home at the wrong time. Kang Ji-Hoon did not make mistakes of scheduling. His life operated on a precision that was less preference than survival. 35 years inside a world where the wrong room at the wrong hour cost consequences that could not be undone had produced in him the specific, absolute discipline of a man who always knew where he was supposed to be, and was always exactly there. He was not supposed to be home until Thursday. The Singapore meeting had collapsed on Tuesday afternoon. The other party had withdrawn, which was information about their position that Ji-Hoon filed and would use later. And he had taken the first available flight back without announcement, because there was no one to announce to, and he had long since stopped performing the gestures of arrival for people who did not require them. He entered through the private garage entrance at 11:42 p.m. He walked through the lower corridor. He took the stairs. He opened the door to the East Wing master suite because it was his suite, and he was tired and the day had required 26 hours of compressed attention, and he wanted to stop being anywhere for a few hours. He stopped. On his bed was a person, not hiding, not placed deliberately. Simply there, asleep, with the complete, trustful abandon of someone who had not intended to fall asleep, and had done it anyway, halfway across the duvet, still in the black uniform of the house staff. Shoes on the floor beside the bed where they had been placed with the careful, considered tidiness of someone who had not wanted to put them on the bedspread. She was Nigerian. He had processed this from the photograph in her employment file, which he had reviewed when the new staff rotation came through. He reviewed all staff files, not from paranoia but from the discipline of a man who did not allow unknown quantities into his personal space. Amara Okafor, 24, on a university exchange scholarship, working nights to supplement her income. Assessment: reliable, private, professional. The assessment had not included "will be asleep in your bed on a Tuesday night." He looked at her. She was sleeping the way people slept when they had been exhausted for a long time, and had finally, accidentally, found somewhere comfortable enough to let go deeply, with the specific, complete quality of true rest. Her face had lost the managed expression of someone doing a job and had arrived at the actual face underneath, which was younger than he expected, and less guarded and slightly troubled in the way of someone whose sleep was good but whose dreams were not entirely quiet. On the nightstand, an empty glass. Wine from the smell of it. He looked at the wine glass. He looked at the sleeping woman in his bed. He understood from these two pieces of information what had happened. The East Wing bar had 12-year Bordeaux that one of his assistants had left properly labelled, but without the follow-up note about its alcohol content relative to ordinary table wine. And someone had come in to clean, and had perhaps investigated the bar, and had accidentally consumed significantly more than intended, and had found his bed in the course of being significantly more than intended. He could wake her. This would be the practical decision. She was a staff member. She was in his suite. She had consumed his wine without permission. The correct resolution involved consciousness on her part and a brief, professional conversation about why this was not an acceptable situation. He stood at the door. He did not wake her. He stood at the door for a moment longer than he had stood in a doorway for any reason in recent memory. He thought about the glass, which she had placed neatly on the nightstand rather than leaving it on the floor or the duvet or any of the other surfaces that would have been easier. He thought about the shoes, placed beside the bed with the specific consideration of someone who had not wanted to damage his bedspread, even in the process of accidentally passing out on it. He thought, even drunk, She was careful with things that weren't hers. He thought, when was the last time someone in this house was careful with things that weren't theirs? He closed the door quietly. He went to the secondary suite. He did not sleep for a long time. In the morning when he came down, she was at the breakfast table with the staff roster and the specific, contained expression of someone who was waiting to be fired and had decided to wait with dignity. He poured his coffee. He said, "The Bordeaux is labeled incorrectly. Have someone fix it." She held the roster. She looked at him. He sat down. He opened his newspaper. She said, "Mr. Kang, last night. The label needs correcting," he said, "so the next person who encounters it doesn't have the same difficulty." She held the roster. She did not look away. She said, "I owe you an apology." "What?" he said. "Exposing a labeling error. I'll have kitchen staff fix it today." He read the newspaper. She sat for a moment longer, then she went back to work. He turned a page. He thought she looked at me like she was expecting punishment. He thought she was ready for it. She had already accepted it. She was just waiting. He thought, when do people stop expecting kindness? He thought, when has anyone in this house expected kindness from me? He read the newspaper. He did not examine why. On the way out that evening he walked through the east wing and checked that the extra blanket was back in the wardrobe where it was kept. He had everything. He controlled everything. He felt nothing, and then she fell asleep in his bed. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your city in the comments. Subscribe immediately, because what happens next nobody sees coming. Least of all him. He came home early the next day. He was not supposed to be home until 7. He arrived at 4:32. He did not examine this. He said to his chief of staff that he was reviewing the East Wing renovation proposal and needed to be on site. This was plausible. The renovation proposal existed. He had read it twice in the car on the way back from his 3 o'clock and had not retained any of it. He walked through the East Wing at 4:45. He heard her laughing, not at him, not near him, from the East Corridor, through a partly open door, where she was apparently in conversation with one of the older housekeeping staff, Mrs. Park, who had been with the household for 19 years and who laughed approximately twice a year, documented occasions. She was laughing now. He stood in the corridor. He listened to Mrs. Park laugh. He thought, when did I last hear someone laugh in this house? He thought, I cannot remember. He thought, how is it possible that I cannot remember? He went to his office. He sat at his desk. He did not review the renovation proposal. He thought about a woman who placed her shoes carefully on the floor beside his bed so they wouldn't mark the duvet, and who made a 19-year employee laugh on a Wednesday afternoon. He thought, she is not performing this. She is not laughing because it is professionally appropriate to laugh. She is laughing because something was actually funny. He thought, I spend most of my days in rooms full of people performing everything. He thought, when did I stop noticing that? His chief of staff knocked. Ji-Hoon said, the Okafor file, I'd like an updated copy. His chief of staff did not visibly react to this request. He was well trained, of course, he said. Any particular area? Current studies, Ji-Hoon said. Academic record, scholarship status. He looked at the proposal on his desk. He thought, this is a practical interest. She is a staff member. I like to understand the people in my household. He thought, I have never once requested a staff member's academic file before. He looked at the proposal. He thought, this is fine. He thought, this is completely fine. The file arrived Thursday morning. He used his 30-minute reading window, normally reserved for financial reports, on Amara Okafor's academic record, top 12% of cohort. Partial scholarship. Waitlist for graduate funding for 6 months. Still on the waitlist, he read through the 11 applicants ranked ahead of her. Then read them again. 2 had weaker academic records. The evaluation criteria had been applied unevenly. He sent 1 email to the university's external advisory board, of which he was a member, flagging the inconsistency. He told himself this was procedural. He came home at 4:15. She was in the kitchen garden on the phone, speaking Ambw, her gestures wider than at work, her laugh arriving faster. Being the version her family needed to see. I'm fine. Don't worry. He stood at the window. He thought, I do the same thing. He went to his office. He did not review the renovation proposal. He started coming home early every day. He told himself different reasons each time. He stopped examining the reasons. The scholarship letter arrived on a Tuesday. She made a sound in the entrance hall, wordless, the kind that preceded language when something important happened. He looked up from his book. She was holding the letter with both hands, the whole body quality of someone receiving news they had stopped expecting. I got the scholarship, she said. Congratulations. She looked at it, then at him. I was on the wait list for 6 months. I thought. You have a strong application, he said. She went to call her mother. Through 2 walls he heard a phone call that began in Ambw and ended in laughter. He sat in the dining room holding an unread book. He thought, nothing I have ever achieved has sounded like that. She started leaving things, a book on the corridor windowsill. Her preferred tea appearing beside the staff supply. Reading glasses on the library table where she studied evenings. he started leaving things too. The renovation proposal permanently on the dining table. A book on Nigerian architectural history outside the library. His secondary reading glasses that migrated from the study to the kitchen. She found the architecture book, brought it to dinner, specifically Yoruba spatial design, she said, that's very specific for a development project. I like to understand contexts, she looked at him. Then, Amara means grace in Igbo, also eternal in Arabic. My mother wanted both. A pause. She wanted me to be graceful and lasting. He set down his fork. She succeeded, he said. The dining room went quiet, he said. The reason his phone rang. The Busan situation, 3 weeks building now requiring his immediate attention, he answered, stood, left. She sat at the table staring at the book. The reason what? He did not come back. Han So-young arrived early to a charity committee meeting. She saw Amara carrying flowers through the corridor, watched her go. When Ji-Hoon arrived, she said, you've been coming home at 4 p.m. for 6 weeks. You renovated that wing for 2 years without changing your schedule once. The renovation requires oversight, he said. She looked at him a long time. She's not like anyone you'd usually notice, she said as she left. He said nothing. That's exactly why you noticed her. He stood in the entrance hall after she was gone. He thought, she is the first person in a long time who came into this house and was not performing anything. I am performing something, she is not. I don't know what to do with someone who isn't. The internship appeared on the University Career Board in October. Ji-Hoon knew about it. He sat on the company's board. The Lagos position had been discussed in September. He did not place her name in consideration. He thought about it. He did not do it. Her thesis supervisor, Professor Kim, submitted her name independently. Ji-Hoon was on the interview panel. He recused himself. The 2 remaining panelists selected her. His chief of staff described her interview performance as remarkable. She came to find him in the library. I got the internship. She held the letter. How did you know about the Lagos position? I sit on the board. It was announced in September. You, she stopped. Was this you? I recused myself from the panel. Professor Kim submitted your name. The remaining panelists selected you. She held his gaze. He thought, believe me, she said. Okay, he said, congratulations, Amara. After she left, he held his book. He thought, she believed me. That is the most important thing that has happened in this house in a very long time. The photographs appeared in October. She found them because Mrs. Park's nephew had sent a concerned message, and Mrs. Park couldn't navigate her phone, and Amara had looked at the screen and seen Ji-Hoon standing outside a Gangnam building with 3 men who appeared on no corporate board. That evening she searched. Found nothing criminal. The word criminal appeared nowhere, but fraternal organizations, private security interests, names assembled into a picture she couldn't unassemble. She sat in her room. The scholarship. The internship. He comes home early every day. He recused himself. Why recuse himself if he'd already arranged? The recusal was the arrangement. She stopped herself. He said it directly. He didn't hide it, but what else is he hiding? She found the security report by accident, cross-referencing cleaning supply expenditures. Wrong folder. Single document between the accounts, a threat assessment dated 8 months ago with her name. A former rival of Ji-Hoon had sent 2 men to approach her as leverage. The 2 men had been redirected. She set it down. He stopped it. He never told me, because telling me meant losing me. Is that love or is that control? I cannot tell. She looked for him after dinner. His chief of staff said emergency meeting. She went to her room. Tomorrow I will ask him. She did not sleep. She found him the next morning in the library at 6 a.m. She closed the door. He held his coffee and said nothing. Someone targeted me, she said. 2 men, you stopped it and you never told me. He set down the coffee. Who are you? She said. Not the corporate version. A long pause. Kang organization. I am its current head. He held her gaze. What you found in those photographs is accurate. The scholarship. Evaluative inconsistency. I corrected a process error. I did not place your name. The internship. Professor Kim submitted your name. I recused myself. The security report. Were there others? Yes, many. For over 14 months. She thought about that 4 times. She never knew. Why didn't you tell me? Because telling you required telling you everything, and telling you everything meant. He stopped. It meant I would leave, she said. He said nothing. She understood. He chose protecting me over having me know. She said, I need time. Yes, she left. She gave her notice on a Monday. Professional, brief. Mrs. Park brought Ji-Hoon the letter with the expression of someone watching something end. He said, standard arrangements. He went to the window, watched the garden. The house was fine before. He thought about laughter in the corridor. I did not know that quiet was what it was. Her last day was a Friday. He was not home. He arranged to be in Busan. When he returned, the note was on the study desk. Thank you for everything you did that I know about. I think there was more I didn't know about. I should have stayed to ask you about it. I didn't know how to be in the same room as everything you are and everything you did and not know what to do with it. He held the note. He put it in the drawer. He thought I would like to tell her everything. I don't know how 6 weeks later they moved against her, her scholarship flagged for review. Spurious grounds, the kind that wouldn't survive scrutiny but could delay and complicate and wear a person down. Ji-Hoon still had the monitoring active. He had told himself he'd remove it after she left. He had not removed it. He made 3 calls. The review dissolved in 48 hours. The source was identified. He thought about what to do with the source. He thought about what she would say. She would say there was a line. He made a 4th call, legal pressure only. Document everything. I want the mechanism exposed, not destroyed. He sat at the desk afterward. He thought it was never about her knowing. It was always about her being all right. The attack came in February, not from Sejin. Sejin had been contained. From a connection 2 steps removed, leveraging an exposure that Sejin's flagging mechanism had inadvertently created before it was shut down. The kind of cascading consequence that happened when you touched one thing in a system with too many moving parts. Ji-Hoon was in Seoul. He received the alert at 11 p.m. He was at the hospital by 12:45. Not as a visitor, as the person who had arranged the security response that had reached her before the attack fully executed, who had been monitoring through a system she did not know existed, who had activated a response team before the situation required one, arriving too late to prevent everything but early enough to prevent worse. She had a broken wrist. A concussion. She was awake, which was what mattered. He waited in the corridor. He did not go in. Her friends were with her, roommates from the university exchange program, 2 women who had arrived within 30 minutes who were in the room, who were the appropriate people to be in the room. He sat in the corridor. At 3 a.m. a nurse came out and went to the station. At 3:15 one of her friends came out for water and saw him. She stopped. She said, yes. She said, how did you know? He said, a monitoring service flagged the incident. She looked at him. She said you weren't. She said the employment was. He said, it was. I maintained the monitoring separately. She looked at him. She said nothing. She went back inside. At 4 a.m. the door opened. Amara stood in the doorway. She was wearing a hospital gown and had her arm in a temporary sling, and she looked at him in the corridor with the specific, complete attention of someone who was taking in multiple pieces of information simultaneously and was not finished with any of them. He stood. She said, how long have you been here? He said, since 12:45. She said, you called the response team. He said, yes. She said, before the attack fully? He said, yes. She looked at him. She said, how? He said, I maintained the monitoring. She was quiet for a moment. She said, after I left. He said, yes. She said, why? He held her gaze. He said, because Sejin's network didn't dissolve when he was contained. There was residual exposure. I kept the monitoring until I was certain the exposure was closed. She held her gaze. She said, is that the whole reason? He held her gaze. He said, no. She looked at the corridor. She looked at him. She said, come inside. He followed her into the room. The door closed. The sounds of the hospital corridor faded into a quiet that belonged entirely to them. You stayed, she said. Yes. Even after I told you I couldn't be in the same room as the things you do. He looked at her, his face stripped of the armor he wore for the rest of the world. I didn't stay in the room. I stayed outside it. I just couldn't leave the perimeter. She was discharged 2 days later. The call came the following afternoon, a number she didn't recognize. Miss Okafor, the voice said. It was calm, older and accustomed to authority. My name is Kang Chairman, Ji-Hoon's father. I apologize for calling without introduction, but I have something I'd like you to see. They met in a private room of a restaurant in Gangnam. The chairman was 71 and had the bearing of a man who had spent decades making decisions that moved cities. He sat across from Amara and placed a single folder on the table. He didn't give her spreadsheets. He didn't give her administrative logs. He gave her the 3 things that mattered: her scholarship documentation, the security report from the night he saved her, and a legal order severing his operational ties to his own organization. He started this 2 months before you confronted him, the chairman said. He burned a major alliance to protect you. He won't tell you this because he'd rather you believe the worst of him and be safe than know the truth and come back into danger. He looked at her steadily. But I would rather have a son who is in danger and whole than safe and empty. Chairman stood up and left the room. Amara sat alone. She opened the folder. Beneath the security files there was something else. A stack of paper. Handwritten unsent letters. She opened the first one. Dated 16 months ago. I am aware that this letter will not be sent. I notice when you are here. I notice when you are not. This is unusual. I am not certain what it means. She opened the next letter. And the next. They weren't security briefings. They were the desperate, quiet observations of a man trying, through a format that had no recipient, to understand his own heart. The last letter was dated 3 weeks after she left. I want you to know the house has been quiet since you left. I want you to know I am aware of the difference. I want you to remember that the jollof rice was an attempt I made because you mentioned Sunday mornings at home. And I couldn't give you Lagos. but I thought maybe I could give you the smell of it. She closed the folder. She thought about a man learning to cook in the middle of the night. She finished reading the letters. She got up, put on her coat and went outside. She sat beside him. He looked at her. She said, "The unsent folder." He held her gaze. He said, "That was not supposed to be included." She said, "But it was." He said, "Yes." She held her hands in her lap. She said, "How long have you been doing this?" He was quiet for a long time. She waited. He said, "Since the night I came home and found laughter inside my house." She held his gaze. He said, "Not just the monitoring. Not just the interventions, the coming home early, the library, the book." He looked at the sunrise. "I have been reorganizing around your presence for 14 months, and then for the 6 months you have been gone." She held his gaze. She said, "The jollof rice." He said, "I made it 17 times. She stared at him. He said, "The first 3 batches I burned the tomato base. The next 4 I didn't cook it long enough. The 10th attempt I finally understood what until the oil separates meant physically rather than abstractly." He held her gaze. "The 17th batch was correct. I ate it alone in the kitchen at 11 p.m. She held his gaze. She said, "You ate jollof rice alone at 11 p.m. He said, "Yes." She said, "And then what?" He said, "And then I sat at the kitchen table and thought about Sunday mornings in Lagos that I have never seen and that you described once briefly while clearing a dining table and that I have apparently been thinking about since." She held his gaze. The light was coming up over the hospital building. She said, "You are the most complicated person I have ever encountered." He said, "Yes." She said, "You are also." She stopped. He held her gaze. She said, "You did all of it without ever once asking for anything back." He held her gaze. He said, "I didn't do it for something back." She said, "I know." She held his gaze. She thought about a man who placed a blanket back in the wardrobe. She thought about a house that started laughing. She thought about 17 batches of jollof rice and an unsent letter and a corridor bench at 5:47 a.m. She thought, "He kept the blanket." She thought that was the beginning. She said, "The house is quieter without me." He said, "Yes." She said, "You noticed the difference." He said, "Every day." She held his gaze. She said, "Ji-Hoon." He looked at her. She had not used his given name before. He held very still. She said, "I'm not going to pretend this is simple." He said, "I know." She said, "I am not going to pretend what you are is something I understand or have made peace with." He said, "I know." She said, "But I am going to tell you something." He held her gaze. She said, "I read every letter." He held her gaze. She said, "Every single one." He said nothing. She said, "And I know that you have never in your life asked for something from someone who could not afford to give it." He held her gaze. She said, "Ask me something." He looked at the sunrise. He said, "Come back to the house." She held his gaze. She said, "Not as staff." He said, "No." She said, "As," held her gaze. He said, "As the person who makes the house sound the way it does when you're in it." She held his gaze. She thought about Sunday mornings and oil separating from tomato paste and a man who had been quiet for 35 years learning, slowly and badly, to be something else. She said, "Show me the 17th batch." Looked at her. She said, "Make it again tonight. Show me what you learned." He held her gaze. Something happened in his face that she had seen glimpses of before but never fully, the expression of someone allowing themselves to want something out loud without protecting against the wanting. He said, "All right." She stood. She held out her hand. He looked at it. He took it. They walked toward the car while Seoul woke up around them. She thought, "This is not simple." She thought, "Nothing about this is simple." She thought, simple was not the thing on offer. She thought, what was on offer was a man who came home early and learned to cook and wrote letters to nobody and waited. She thought, that was what was on offer. She thought, that is enough. That was enough. From a wine glass on a nightstand to a bench at sunrise, this is what it looks like when the most feared man in the room decides that the only thing worth protecting is the one person who never asked to be protected. If this story lived in you, drop your city in the comments. We want to know where you watched from. Like this video immediately. Subscribe right now, and tell me which moment broke you, the jollof rice, the unsent letters, or since the night I came home and found laughter inside my house. Tell me everything. New story next week. Same promise, impossible to stop. I'll see you there.